This is Apple's cream of the crop, and a phone a lot of people have been waiting for, the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Besides bringing all of the goodies that made last year's Pro Max so successful, what has Apple improved on this time around, and is it worth upgrading to? I'm Will for GSM Arena, and let's find out in our iPhone 15 Pro Max review. Apple pretty much delivers a consistent, high-quality product with each iPhone generation. But what makes this year's Pro Max special? Well, there are actually some interesting changes compared to last year. For one, across the board, Apple has finally changed from a Lightning port and cable to USB-C, the standard you find on pretty much all other mobile devices. Say goodbye to dongles and adapters, unless you wanted to plug in headphones, but yeah. The phone also features a new programmable action key, evolved from the silencer hardware button. Of course, the iPhone 15 Pro Max packs a new, more powerful chipset. And its improved main camera and new 5x periscope telephoto zoom are very welcome changes. Let's start off though by diving into the design. With a flat back made of matte glass and triple circle camera bump, the looks are quite similar to before, but there are a couple of changes here compared to last year. First off, the iPhone 15 Pro Max is 20 grams lighter than the previous model, and you can feel it right away. Plus, you get rounded chamfers where the back meets the frame, which lends a more natural in-hand feel. But the biggest change is that the frame is made of titanium rather than stainless steel, so it's both stronger and lighter. However, while the new material is more premium, it doesn't quite feel like it. It actually feels just like the aluminum you get on the cheaper iPhone 15 models, and we sort of miss the cold weightiness provided by a steel frame. On top of that, even though you might imagine that a titanium build would be more durable, based on drop and bend tests online, the iPhone 15 Pro Max's back is actually a lot easier to break than the previous model, for whatever reason. At least you can still breathe easy around water. The iPhone 15 Pro Max again brings IP68 rated protection against dust and water submersion. The display of the phone feels lifted straight from last year's model, a 6.7-inch Super Retina XDR OLED with a 120Hz refresh rate and protected by ceramic shield glass. The resolution comes out to a sharp 460 ppi, and you get great contrast as well as very accurate colors. There's support for both HDR10 video and Dolby Vision. And something interesting is that the HDR playback is quite flexible. The HDR can be applied only to the part of the screen that has the video playing. Just like last year, you get the pill-shaped screen cutout for the selfie cam and the 3D TOF scanner for Face Unlock. And the cutout brings its dynamic island functionality as well too, with the black bar extending beyond the cutout to display relevant info and let you easily call up certain apps from the background. This display's max brightness is impressive. We reached nearly 850 nits of maximum brightness with the manual slider, and this boosted to almost 1800 nits in auto mode when presented with bright light. Pro Motion is what Apple calls its dynamic 120Hz refresh rate, and is meant to provide silky smooth swiping and scrolling, then dial down all the way to 1 Hz when idling to save energy. When it comes to the speakers, the iPhone 15 Pro Max brings what seems like the same system we saw in last year's model. The stereo speakers have very good loudness and an impressively rich sound output across the board, from bass to vocals and treble. You can check out for yourself through the provided link. Biometrics are handled through Apple's Face ID, which is quite secure thanks to the TOF camera on the front. It's as fast and reliable as ever. And the iPhone 15 Pro Max can come with 256 or 512 gigs of storage on board, or a whole terabyte. And while that's not expandable through microSD, you can connect an external drive through USB. The interface of the new iPhone generation is iOS 17. It brings the same experience as the previous version with just a few new features sprinkled in. Just as before, the lock screen houses your notifications and shortcuts for the flashlight and camera. It can also behave as an always-on display. Something new is the optional standby mode, which is an always-on display in the landscape orientation which can activate while the phone is charging. There is again plenty of support for widgets, and now you even get interactive widgets. You can tap on these and change things without even going into the app. There is also a new customizable call screen, which Apple calls contact posters. For each contact, you have plenty of options for how they appear, including photos, memojis, and text. Some other new features in iOS 17 include password sharing with friends, offline maps, and live voicemail. Like I mentioned earlier, the silencer key has become the new action key, which triggers when you long press it. There are a few predefined actions available, as well as a shortcut button which allows you to assign pretty much whatever you want for your convenience. It could be a bit more convenient though. The location of the key is up high where the silencer was, not the easiest to reach on the fly. And I'll briefly touch upon the USB-C connectivity. While the phone itself supports USB 3, the cable that comes in the box actually only supports USB 2 speeds. There's a Type-C alt mode, which allows you to output the phone's screen to an external monitor. You can even output video in 4K at 60 FPS with the proper adapter. Since the aspect ratio matches the phone's though, you'll get letterboxing and black bars for most content, including YouTube. However, some specific apps, like Netflix, can support full screen output. There's also support for USB-C host mode, which allows you to connect things like a mouse or keyboard to the iPhone through the port, and even record 4K video directly to external storage. Now let's talk about the chipset, Apple's new A17 Pro. They've dropped the Bionic label for this one. The chipset's GPU features hardware-accelerated ray tracing, which is supposedly 4 times faster than the software-based ray tracing of last year's A16 Bionic chip. We see this in graphics benchmarks. In a specific ray tracing test, the improvement is a massive 60%. Otherwise, when it comes to overall CPU and GPU performance, the difference from last year is a modest 10% improvement. Still, this makes the iPhone 15 Pro Max one of the most powerful smartphones out there, and Apple believes in its capabilities, lining up popular console-grade game titles for release on iOS. It's not all about raw power though. Sustained performance and thermal management are just as important. In our prolonged CPU stress test, the phone throttled gradually to 78%, which is decent. It could be better though. Last year's Pro Max maintained much higher max performance in the same test. It seems that something about the software could be affecting it though, because after updating to iOS 17, the iPhone 14 Pro Max could only maintain 76% of its max performance, compared to 92% previously. But even despite all that, we didn't encounter any drops or hiccups when gaming, and we never experienced the phone becoming unbearably hot either, even after rigorous testing. The iPhone 15 Pro Max is powered by a 4,441 mAh battery, a minor increase over the 14 Pro Max's 4,323. With it, the iPhone 15 Pro Max scored a great total endurance rating of 118 hours, almost the same as the 121 hours of last year's model. The iPhone doesn't come with a charger in the box, as expected. With an Apple 20-watt power adapter, we were able to charge the 15 Pro Max from 0 to 46% in half an hour. Nothing exciting, and about the same as last year. There's also support for wireless charging, and MagSafe support for those magnetized wireless chargers. Now let's get into the cameras. On the back is a 48-megapixel main cam, a 12-megapixel 5x telephoto cam, a 12-megapixel ultrawide cam, and a 3D TOF LiDAR scanner. The main cam has a bigger sensor this year, and it bins pixels to produce its photos, but it actually outputs 24-megapixel photos by default thanks to some computational improvements. In contrast, most 48-megapixel smartphone cameras, including the one on last year's model, bin pixels 4:1 and produce 12-megapixel photos. During the day, the default photos from the main camera are quite good, with great contrast, no noise, and wide enough dynamic range. The rendition is typically Apple. The colors are natural looking, perhaps even a bit boring, and there's some extra sharpening in fine details when you look up close. You can also take 12-megapixel photos, and when you compare them, you can see that the 24-megapixel ones have more detail, particularly in stationary objects. So taking photos in 24 megapixels makes sense, especially since the file size isn't that much bigger, up to about 1.5 megabytes extra per shot. Still, the phone will take 12-megapixel photos when you're capturing night mode, live photo, portraits, macro, or flash photos. The main cam also allows you to shoot in a 28mm and 35mm focal length. That's 1.2 times and 1.5 times zoom. The zoom is done by cropping from the large sensor, and you can even make either of these modes your default for the main cam. Then we get to 2 times zoom, which is solid. These photos always come out in 12 megapixels, and you get enough detail here. The other properties match the regular photos. Portraits come from the main cam and are taken at 2 times zoom by default. These have impressive subject separation. The sharpness and detail could be better though. In low light scenes, you'll most often get Apple's night mode processing kicking in automatically. These are punchy and warm with abundant detail, great sharpness, and no noise. You get brightened up skies and shadows, and high contrast overall. The only way to get 24 megapixel photos at night is to disable the night mode. These are more realistic looking with a cooler tone, darker overall exposure, and darker and less contrasty shadows. There is still plenty of detail, and while there is some noise, it doesn't get in the way. The iPhone 15 Pro Max can record video in up to 4K at 60 FPS with all of its cameras. The 4K video quality from the main cam is outstanding, with no noise, wide dynamic range, and accurate colors. There's abundant detail, and the processing is pretty well balanced. And no matter which camera you're shooting with, the so-called cinematic video stabilization is easily class-leading. The low-light video from the main cam is very good, with enough detail, low noise, and good exposure. The dynamic range is realistic, and color saturation is great. Let's move on to the 5x telephoto camera. It's the first periscope zoom on an iPhone and a highlight of this year's camera setup. The camera features an innovative tetraprism periscope design. It also has advanced optical stabilization, where both the lens and sensor move to stabilize the image. The 5x zoom photos are very good, with plenty of detail, low noise, and balanced sharpness. The rest of the properties are a match to what the main camera offers: great contrast, realistic dynamic range, and accurate colors. In low light, with auto night mode, the zoomed photos from the telephoto cam are outstanding. They have plenty of detail, excellent sharpness, low noise, and great colors and contrast. The dynamic range is good too. Opting out of the night mode most often results in a 5x digital zoom from the main camera. 4K videos from the telephoto cam are great. The quality is a bit lower than the main cams though. And now we move on to the ultrawide cam. Its photos are great for this sort of camera, with a lot of detail, good dynamic range, and impressive sharpness and rendition in the corners. High-frequency details and things like foliage do come out a bit smeared looking though. The ultrawide camera has autofocus, so you can use it to shoot close-up subjects. There's even a dedicated macro mode, which adds some digital zoom on top of that. In low light, again with night mode kicking in, the ultrawide cam does an excellent job. The photos are bright and detailed, with balanced sharpness, well-cleaned noise, and superb color saturation and high contrast. If you opt out of the night mode, the photos are darker, softer, and noisier, with dull colors. They're still usable but are rather mediocre. The ultrawide cam's 4K videos are impressive, with stunning sharpness around the corners, and the other properties match the main cams. The iPhone 15 Pro Max has the same selfie camera as last year, which has autofocus. 12 megapixel selfies are superb, with lovely colors, no noise, adequate dynamic range, and plenty of detail. The details are maybe a bit too pronounced though, and they may come out as unflattering. So that's the iPhone 15 Pro Max. It's one of the most premium phones around, but even so, let's consider what it brings to the table compared to the previous model. You get the lighter design with the titanium frame, the new action key, the new chipset with hardware ray tracing, and the revamped cameras, which include a nice 5x telephoto. It's not perfect though. There's the question about its durability, thanks to bend and drop tests online, and the combination of this chipset and iOS 17 seems to have worse thermal management than what we got on the 14 Pro Max and iOS 16. Still, these aren't exactly deal breakers, and at the end of the day, this is the latest and greatest iPhone with solid upgrades, and it's worth recommending. Thanks for watching, guys. We have a little game for you. 4 of the scenes in this video were actually shot with an iPhone 15 Pro. Can you guess which ones they were? We'll let you know in the video description. See you next time.